Chapter 1: The Thin Place. The cold was the first constant. It lived in the stone, breathed from the narrow windows like the gasp of a dying giant, and settled deep in the marrow of Brother Kaelen's bones. Even layered in wool and the thick, undyed fabric of his habit, the cold was inescapable, a reminder of their precarious perch atop the world's jagged spine. Mount Cinderfell, they called it, though Kaelen had never seen anything burn here, only freeze. The Monastery of St. Jude the Silent, carved into the mountain's highest reaches, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a scab on the face of the sky, clinging desperately against the scouring wind and the crushing weight of the void above. Kaelen adjusted the rough-spun cowl around his face, his breath misting in the frigid air of the great cloister. Barely 6 months had passed since he'd taken his vows, trading the green, rolling hills of his youth for this stark fortress of faith and silence. He was still the newest arrival, the fledgling, as Brother Malachi, the sharp-tongued scriptorian, sometimes called him with a hint of weary amusement. He clutched the smooth, worn wood of the offering bowl tighter, its emptiness a stark contrast to the profound, unseen something that filled the monastery to its brim. They called it the vigil, the great work, the silent scream. It was why they were here, sequestered from the world below, living lives of austere devotion, not merely to pray or contemplate, but to contain. Deep within the mountain, deeper than the lowest crypts, lay the chamber of anchors. It was there, in shifts lasting hours that felt like lifetimes, that the elder brothers focused their collective psychic will, maintaining the luminous, intricate lattice of faith and mental fortitude that held back them. The outsiders, the void-kissed, the choir of chaos, names whispered in hushed tones during the rare moments of instruction, names that felt inadequate, like trying to describe the sun by calling it bright. Kaelen hadn't been deemed ready for the chamber itself, his mind still too untrained, his faith too untested. For now, his duties were mundane, tending the sputtering lamps, scrubbing floors worn smooth by centuries of sandaled feet, assisting Brother Finian in the meager herb garden sheltered in a high, sun-trapped courtyard, and participating in the lesser chants that resonated through the monastery, harmonics designed to reinforce the main psychic barrier from without. Today, however, marked a small milestone. Abbot Lorcan had tasked him with collecting the personal meditation aids, smooth stones, carved wooden symbols, knotted cords left behind by the brothers concluding their shift in the antechamber, the final buffer zone before the true containment field. It was the closest he'd yet come to the heart of their struggle. He pushed open the heavy, iron-banded door leading towards the deeper levels. The air grew colder still, but it was a different kind of cold now, not just physical but psychic. A pressure building behind the eyes, a faint, high-frequency hum that vibrated teeth and bone. It was the tangible presence of the barrier, the psychic membrane straining against unimaginable pressure. He felt it before, of course, during the monastery-wide reinforcement rituals, but never this close, this raw. The corridor sloped downwards, the rough-hewn rock glistening with moisture that never seemed to freeze, despite the temperature. The only light came from widely spaced niches holding globes of softly glowing lichen, cultivated by Brother Finian, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to cling to Kaelen's heels. Silence deepened here, not the peaceful quiet of contemplation, but a heavy, waiting silence, as if the mountain itself held its breath. He reached the antechamber door, another slab of dark, ancient wood reinforced with pitted black metal that felt unnaturally cold to the touch. He hesitated, his heart thudding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He whispered the simple prayer of passage taught to all novices, feeling the familiar warmth of faith spread through him, a countercurrent to the psychic chill. It was real. Their faith was the shield. He had to believe that. He pushed the door inward. The antechamber was stark, circular, its walls smooth and featureless save for the faint, almost imperceptible geometric patterns etched into the stone remnants Brother Malachi had explained of older, cruder wards. 7 stone plinths were arranged in a circle, 6 currently empty. On the 7th sat Brother Torvin, the stoic master of defenses, his back ramrod straight, eyes closed, face etched with concentration. He didn't acknowledge Kaelen's entrance. The air thrummed, thick and heavy as water. Kaelen could feel the proximity of the true chamber beyond the far wall, a palpable throb of contained power and the immense, terrifying otherness pressing against it. He quickly gathered the discarded meditation aids from the empty plinths, a river stone worn smooth as glass, a tangle of knotted leather, a small icon of St. Jude whose painted eyes seemed unnervingly wide. He placed them carefully into his wooden bowl, his movements practiced and silent. As he reached for the last item near Brother Torvin's plinth, a simple, unadorned focusing crystal, his fingers brushed against the cold stone. A jolt, not of static but of thought, shot up his arm. It wasn't a voice, not words, but a feeling, an image, sharp and venomous. The crystal in his hand shattering, Brother Torvin's face contorting in sudden agony, a crack appearing in the seamless wall leading to the chamber. It was gone as quickly as it came, leaving Kaelen gasping, stumbling back, the bowl clattering against the stone floor. Brother Torvin's eyes snapped open. They were usually the color of slate, hard and impassive. Now, for a fleeting second, they seemed hazy, clouded with something other than focus. Then they cleared, fixing on Kaelen with sharp annoyance. Fledgling, Torvin's voice was a low rumble, roughened by hours of silent concentration. Control yourself. This is not the place for clumsiness. Kaelen flushed, scrambling to gather the scattered items. Forgive me, brother, I stumbled. He didn't dare mention the vision, the intrusive thought. It was his own weakness, surely. A flicker of doubt caused by the oppressive atmosphere, the proximity to the barrier. He hadn't expected the psychic noise to be so invasive. Torvin merely grunted, his eyes closing again, his focus returning inward like a fortress raising its drawbridge. Kaelen finished gathering the items, his hands trembling slightly. He backed out of the antechamber, pulling the heavy door shut, the latch clicking with unnerving loudness in the profound silence. He leaned against the cold corridor wall, breathing heavily. The pressure lessened slightly here, but the image lingered. The shattering crystal, the agonized face, the crack in the world. It hadn't felt like his own thought. It had felt planted. He shook his head, dismissing the notion as foolish pride, a novice's fear manifesting as imagined intrusion. Yet, as he began the slow climb back towards the upper levels, the glowing lichen seemed to cast longer, more distorted shadows, and the silence no longer felt empty, but watchful. Later, during the evening meal, a thin, nourishing broth and hard bread, eaten in ritual silence in the refectory, Kaelen watched Abbot Lorcan. The abbot sat at the head table, his face framed by the flickering candlelight. Lorcan had always seemed ancient to Kaelen, his skin like parchment stretched over sharp bones, his eyes holding the wisdom and weariness of centuries. But tonight, the weariness seemed deeper, etched into the lines around his mouth and eyes. His hand, usually steady as he lifted his spoon, bore a faint tremor. When his gaze swept over the assembled monks, it seemed distant, preoccupied, as if listening to something far beyond the stone walls. Kaelen remembered the jolt in the antechamber, the intrusive, ugly image. He looked around at the other monks, their faces bowed in contemplation or fixed on their meager meal. Brother Malachi caught his eye briefly, a flicker of cynical understanding in his gaze before returning to his broth. Brother Ronan, the chant master, rubbed his temples subtly, a gesture Kaelen hadn't seen before. Was it just the strain, the constant, unrelenting pressure of the vigil, wearing them all down bit by bit? Or was it something else? The thought surfaced unbidden, cold and sharp as an icicle shard. The barrier is weakening. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the rhythmic scraping of spoons against wooden bowls, the familiar scent of boiled barley and dried herbs. It was just the place, he told himself. This monastery was a thin place, pressed hard against the veil of reality. Thoughts could echo strangely here. Fears could take root. It was his own faith that needed strengthening, his own mind that needed discipline. Yet as he finished his meal and prepared for the evening's lesser chants, a sliver of unease remained lodged deep within him. The cold of the stone, the pressure in the air, the tremor in the abbot's hand, the fleeting vision in the antechamber. They felt less like isolated incidents and more like subtle harmonies in a discordant, slowly building chord. A chord that resonated with a single, chilling note: doubt. He took his place in the choir stalls, the familiar Latin phrases feeling thick and clumsy on his tongue. He forced himself to focus, adding his small psychic energy to the collective effort, reinforcing the unseen shield. But even as he chanted, a part of his mind kept returning to the dark corridor, the heavy door, and the feeling that something, unseen and unheard, had brushed against the edges of his soul. The vigil continued, the silence held, but Kaelen couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the deep frozen heart of the mountain, a hairline crack had appeared in the ice, and something was beginning to seep through. Chapter 2: Whispers in the Stone. The days settled into a tense rhythm, the familiar cadence of monastic life underscored by a growing sense of unease that Kaelen couldn't shake. The incident in the antechamber clung to him like frost, a persistent chill beneath the surface of his thoughts. He tried to bury it in the minutiae of his duties, scrubbing floors with frantic energy, tending the struggling herbs with obsessive care, reciting his chants until his throat was raw, but the memory lingered, a discordant note in the quiet symphony of the monastery. It was during the long hours spent transcribing ancient texts in the scriptorium, under the watchful, cynical gaze of Brother Malachi, that the whispers began. Not audible sounds, not at first. More like static at the edge of hearing, a high-pitched whine just below the threshold of conscious perception that seemed to emanate from the very stones around him. Kaelen initially blamed fatigue, the strain of focusing on intricate calligraphy by the wavering light of the tallow candles. He rubbed his temples, trying to clear the fuzziness from his mind, the pressure behind his eyes that never seemed to fully dissipate now. Brother Malachi looked up from the crumbling manuscript he was meticulously restoring, his eyes sharp behind smudged spectacles. Distracted, fledgling, his voice was dry as old parchment. The script demands focus. One misplaced stroke can twist meaning, turn prayer into blasphemy. Kaelen flinched. "Forgive me, Brother Malachi, the light tires my eyes." Malachi grunted, unconvinced. "The light has been the same for 5 centuries. Perhaps the fault lies not with the light, but with what the eyes perceive." He returned to his work, but Kaelen felt the weight of his scrutiny. Malachi missed little, his skepticism, a finely honed tool sharpened by years of deciphering faded ink and questionable dogma. Did he sense Kaelen's unease? Or was Kaelen merely projecting his own anxiety onto the older monk? That evening, during the communal meditation period, the static coalesced. As Kaelen knelt on the cold stone floor of the chapel, trying to still his racing thoughts and contribute his small measure of psychic stability to the vigil, the whispers found shape. They weren't external. They seemed to bloom from within his own mind, insidious tendrils curling around his focus. Useless, the thought slid into his consciousness, smooth and cold. "Your faith is a flickering candle in a hurricane. What can you truly contribute?" He recoiled mentally, trying to reinforce his prayers, visualize the shield of faith, the luminous barrier described by the abbot. A barrier built by weary old men, the whisper continued, twisting his own nascent fears into accusations. "Look at Lorcan. He trembles. His belief is cracked. How long until it shatters? How long until they spill through?" Kaelen squeezed his eyes shut, focusing on the image of St. Jude, the patron of lost causes, their silent protector. Lost causes indeed, the thought mocked, trapped on a frozen peak holding back the inevitable tide. For what? A thankless God, a world that doesn't even know you exist. They sacrifice themselves, generation after generation, feeding their souls to the silence. Is it devotion or delusion? He tried to block it, to identify the source. It felt intimate, like his own deepest anxieties given voice, yet alien, tainted with a cold, calculating malice. This was the murmuring shade, he realized with a jolt of terror. Not a physical entity skulking in the shadows, but a psychic parasite, thriving in the fertile ground of uncertainty. It was feeding on the ambient fear, the strain of the vigil, and now it had found him. He pushed back with a surge of desperate faith, reciting the litany of warding under his breath, the ancient words a shield against the invasive thoughts. The whispers receded, not vanishing entirely but retreating to the periphery, leaving behind a residue of chilling doubt. Had he truly repelled it, or had it simply withdrawn, satisfied with planting its venomous seeds? He opened his eyes. Across the chapel, Brother Ronan, the chant master, was massaging his temples again, his face pale and drawn. During the lesser chants earlier, Kaelen had noticed the harmonies falter, subtle dissonances creeping into the usually perfect resonance. Ronan had covered it quickly, but the momentary discord had sent a ripple of unease through the chanting monks, a shared flicker of psychic instability that felt like a physical blow against the unseen barrier. Paranoia began to bloom in the fertile ground the shade had prepared. Kaelen found himself watching the other monks with suspicion. Was Brother Torvin's stoicism cracking under the strain? Was Brother Finian's gentle kindness masking a deeper fear? When Brother Dermot, the disciplinarian, assigned Kaelen an extra shift cleaning the icy latrines, was it standard procedure, or a punishment born of some perceived slight, some doubt Dermot sensed in him? He saw the same suspicion reflected in the eyes of others. Conversations in the cloister ceased abruptly when he approached. Monks walked with heads bowed, avoiding eye contact, the customary silence deepening into a strained, mistrustful quiet. The shared burden of the vigil, which should have forged unbreakable bonds, felt like it was fraying, replaced by isolating fear. One afternoon, seeking refuge from the oppressive atmosphere, Kaelen climbed the winding stairs to the monastery's small, high-altitude observatory. It was rarely used now, the delicate brass instruments coated in a fine layer of dust, but its thick crystal dome offered a stunning, if terrifying, view of the surrounding peaks and the infinite, star-dusted void above. He needed perspective, a reminder of the cosmic scale of their struggle. He found Abbot Lorcan already there, standing motionless before the dome, gazing out not at the stars, but at the desolate, snow-swept slopes falling away into shadow. The abbot didn't turn as Kaelen entered, his voice quiet, heavy with weariness. "It presses harder now, Kaelen. Can you feel it?" Kaelen hesitated, unsure how honest he should be. "There is a tension, Abbot, in the stones, in the silence." Lorcan nodded slowly, his silhouette stark against the star-dusted panorama. "The barrier weakens, not just from the pressure without, but from the cracks within." He finally turned. His eyes, usually filled with paternal warmth, now held a profound sadness and a flicker of something Kaelen hesitantly identified as fear. "Doubt is a contagion, young brother, more insidious than any plague. It finds the smallest hairline fracture in faith and widens it, until the entire structure groans under the strain." Kaelen thought of the whispers, the invasive thoughts that felt like his own, yet weren't. "Abbot, I have felt intrusions, thoughts that are not my own, mocking our purpose, questioning." Lorcan's gaze sharpened. "The shade," he murmured. "It grows bolder, it feeds on dissonance, on suspicion. When brother mistrusts brother, when belief falters, the barrier thins. We become vulnerable." He sighed, a sound like dust settling in an old tomb. "Guard your thoughts, Kaelen, guard your faith. It is all we have." He wanted to ask more, to confess the depth of his own unsettling thoughts, the vision in the antechamber, but the abbot turned back to the window, his shoulders slumped, seemingly lost in contemplation or perhaps listening to the whispers only he could fully discern. Kaelen felt a surge of pity, quickly followed by a cold wave of fear. If the abbot, the spiritual anchor of their community, was struggling, what hope was there for the rest of them? What hope was there for him? As he descended the stairs, the whispers returned, insidious and cloying. "See, even your leader falters. The shepherd is lost, the flock scatters. Who will protect you when his strength fails completely?" He stumbled on a step, catching himself on the icy stone wall. His hand came away slick with moisture. He looked closer. It wasn't water. A dark, viscous fluid, thick and sluggish like half-congealed blood, was weeping from a hairline crack in the ancient stone. He stared at it, his breath catching in his throat. Bleeding stone. He'd heard the tailies dismiss them as allegory metaphors for the monastery's psychic wounds, but this was real, physical. He backed away slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. The shade wasn't just in their minds anymore. Its influence, fed by their growing doubt, was beginning to manifest, bleeding into the very fabric of their sanctuary. The whispers seemed louder now, swirling around him like unseen currents in the frigid air. It begins, they seem to hiss, a sound like dry leaves skittering across frozen ground. The unmaking begins. Kaelen fled back towards the relative light and activity of the main cloister, but the image of the weeping stone remained seared into his mind. The infection was spreading, not just within their thoughts, but into the physical realm. The monastery, their fortress against the void, was starting to bleed. And Kaelen feared, with a certainty that chilled him more than the mountain cold, that it was only the beginning. The whispers were no longer just static. They were finding their voice, and their words promised only dissolution and despair. Chapter 3: Cracks in the Choir. The bleeding stone was an ill omen, a physical manifestation of the psychic decay Kaelen felt spreading through the monastery like black mold beneath floorboards. He reported it to Abbot Lorcan, who merely nodded grimly, his face etched with a weariness that seemed to have aged him years in mere days. "Guard the weak points, Kaelen," was all he'd said. "Reinforce the faith where it falters." But how could Kaelen reinforce anything when his own foundations felt increasingly unstable? The whispers persisted, a constant, insidious hum beneath the silence, amplifying every doubt, twisting every observation. He saw Brother Finian, the gentle herbalist, jump at shadows, his hands trembling as he measured out calming tinctures that seemed to offer little solace. He heard Brother Malak's cynical remarks take on a sharper, more desperate edge, his skepticism curdling into outright despair. Fear was a palpable presence now, thick and cloying as incense smoke, clinging to the corners of the ancient halls. The most alarming changes, however, manifested during the rituals, the very heart of their defense. The lesser chants, meant to harmonize the monks' collective psychic energy and bolster the main barrier, grew increasingly fraught. Brother Ronan, the chant master, bore the brunt of it. His usually resonant voice became strained, his brow perpetually furrowed in concentration. During one evening chant, as the familiar Latin phrases filled the chapel, Kaelen felt the psychic harmony waver violently. A discordant note, sharp and grating, tore through the resonance, originating from Ronan's section of the choir. It felt like a physical blow, making Kaelen gasp and clutch his head. Several other monks flinched, their focus breaking. Ronan's face was sheet-white, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chapel's chill. He fought to regain control, his voice trembling, but the harmony was shattered. The air grew thick with dissonant energy, the protective field they were collectively weaving flickering like a guttering candle flame. Kaelen could almost feel the pressure from the void outside surge against the weakened shield, a silent, crushing weight. Suddenly, Brother Dermot, the disciplinarian, rose from his place, his face a mask of righteous fury. "Brother Ronan," his voice cracked like a whip in the sudden silence. "Your weakness compromises us all. You pollute the sacred harmonics. Have the whispers found fertile ground in your hollow faith?" Ronan recoiled as if struck. "No, brother, it is difficult. The patterns shift, the tones, they twist." "Excuses," Dermot spat, stepping forward, his hand clenched. "Doubt is the path to corruption. You will purify yourself, penance, isolation." "Enough!" Abbot Lorcan's voice, though weakened, still commanded authority. He rose slowly, steadying himself on the edge of the choir stall. His eyes, however, darted nervously between Ronan and Dermot, and Kaelen saw the deep fissure of uncertainty in his gaze. "Brother Dermot, control your zeal. Brother Ronan, step down for now. Brother Kaelen," he gestured to the keeper of the ritual flames, a quiet, unassuming monk, "lead the closing invocation." The remaining chant was ragged, devoid of its usual power. The monks dispersed in strained silence, avoiding each other's eyes. The incident left a poisonous residue, mistrust thickening the air. Dermot glared daggers at Ronan, who retreated, looking utterly broken. Kaelen felt a surge of sympathy for the chant master, but it was quickly followed by a chilling thought, whispered by the shade. What if Dermot is right? What if Ronan's faith has failed? Who can you trust? Later that night, unable to sleep, Kaelen wandered the cold corridors. The monastery felt different in the deep hours, the silence heavier, the shadows deeper. He found himself drawn towards the scriptorium, seeking the cold comfort of ancient knowledge, perhaps hoping to find some passage, some forgotten ritual that could explain or combat the growing dread. The door was slightly ajar. Strange. Brother Malachi was meticulous about securing the precious manuscripts. Kaelen pushed the door open gently. A single candle guttered on Malachi's usual desk, casting huge, dancing shadows. And Malachi was there, slumped over a large, leather-bound tome, his spectacles askew, his face pale and still. For a heart-stopping moment, Kaelen thought he was dead. "Brother Malachi," he whispered, his voice trembling. Malachi stirred, lifting his head with a groan. His eyes were bloodshot, unfocused. "Fledgling," he mumbled, his voice thick, "still haunting the halls." "I couldn't sleep," Kaelen admitted. "Are you all right, brother?" Malachi waved a dismissive hand, nearly knocking over the candle. "Just weary, wrestling with inconsistencies." He gestured vaguely at the open book. Its pages were filled with dense, archaic script and intricate diagrams Kaelen didn't recognize. Our history, our purpose. It's not as straightforward as the abbot would have us believe. The whispers stirred in Kaelen's mind. Listen to him. He sees the cracks in the foundation, the lies they built this prison upon. "What do you mean?" Kaelen asked, stepping closer, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. Malachi rubbed his eyes. "The nature of the barrier, the entities we contain, the texts are contradictory. Some suggest the barrier isn't just keeping them out." He lowered his voice, leaning closer, his breath smelling faintly of fermented herbs, Finian's less than successful attempt at a sleep aid, perhaps. "Some suggest it's keeping us in. That St. Jude wasn't just a protector but a jailer for us." Kaelen recoiled. "That's blasphemy, brother." "Is it?" Malachi gave a short, harsh laugh. "Or is it the truth hidden beneath centuries of dogma? Think, Kaelen, why this desolate peak? Why the absolute silence? Why the crushing psychic pressure? Perhaps we are the anomalies, the dangerous variables, contained here lest our own chaotic potential infect the world. The shade surged within Kaelen, amplifying the horrific idea. Yes, you are the prisoners. Your faith is your chain. Lorcan is your warden, feeding you lies. No, Kaelen whispered, shaking his head, trying to push the thought away. The abbot, the vigil, it's to protect. Protect what? Malak's voice rose, bordering on hysteria. An indifferent cosmos, a world that would revile us if they knew what we truly are, or protect the entities from us, from the chaos we carry within our own souls. He slammed his hand down on the ancient text. It's all falling apart, Kaelen. The contradictions are tearing the rituals to shreds. Ronan isn't weak. The harmonics themselves are based on flawed principles, lies decaying under the pressure of truth. Suddenly, the candle flame flared violently, casting Malak's face in stark, monstrous relief. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, coalesce. Kaelen felt an intense wave of psychic pressure, far stronger than anything he'd felt before, slam against the monastery's outer wards. Dust sifted from the vaulted ceiling. The very stones seemed to groan. Malaki stared wildly around the room, his skepticism momentarily overwhelmed by raw terror. "They hear," he whispered, his voice cracking. "They hear the doubt. They feed on it." Kaelen backed away towards the door, his heart pounding. Malak's words, fueled by exhaustion, fear, and perhaps the shade's insidious influence, struck a terrifying chord. What if he was right? What if their entire existence was predicated on a lie? The doubt flooded him, cold and sickening. He turned and fled the scriptorium, leaving Malaki hunched over his contradictory texts, the shadows closing in around him. He ran through the silent corridors, the whispers swirling in his wake, mocking his confusion, feeding his fear. Prisoner, they hissed, jailer, liar, lost. He burst out into the central cloister, gasping for breath in the frigid night air. The moon, nearly full, cast stark black shadows across the snow-dusted flagstones. Standing by the central, frozen fountain was a figure. Kaelen blinked, his eyes adjusting. It was Brother Torvin, the master of defenses, seemingly standing watch. But something was wrong. Torvin stood unnaturally still, his head cocked at an odd angle as if listening intently to the wind. Kaelen approached cautiously. "Brother Torvin." The figure turned slowly. The moonlight illuminated his face. It was Torvin's face, the square jaw, the stern brow, the familiar lines etched by duty and the mountain cold. But the eyes were empty, utterly devoid of recognition, of thought, of soul. They were like polished obsidian, reflecting the cold moonlight with a terrifying vacancy. And the faintest hint of a smile played on the lips, a subtle, chilling curve that was utterly alien to the stoic Brother Torvin Kaelen knew. It wasn't Torvin. Kaelen froze, ice prickling down his spine. The whispers in his mind fell silent, replaced by a single, deafening wave of primal fear. He was looking at something wearing Torvin's face, a perfect replica animated by something utterly inhuman. The figure took a step towards him, its movements smooth, yet subtly wrong, lacking the minute imperfections of human motion. The vacant eyes fixed on Kaelen, and the smile widened fractionally. The mirror monk, it was here. The infection had found a host. The doubt had taken physical form, and it was looking right at him. Chapter 4: The Empty Face. Kaelen stood rooted to the spot, the icy air burning in his lungs. Before him stood the perfect likeness of Brother Torvin, yet the emptiness in those eyes, the chilling vacancy where a soul should reside, screamed wrongness. This was the tangible manifestation of the paranoia that had been festering within the monastery walls, the shade's influence given flesh and bone. The mirror monk. The figure, the false Torvin, tilted its head, the movement unnervingly smooth, like a puppet master pulling invisible strings. The faint, alien smile remained fixed. It didn't speak, didn't need to. Its very presence was a violation, a testament to the crumbling sanity of their sanctuary. Kaelin's mind raced. He had to warn someone, Abbot Lorcan, the real Torvin if he was still, himself. But the false Torvin stood between him and the main doors leading towards the abbot's quarters and the dormitories. Panic surged, cold and sharp. He took an involuntary step back, his foot scuffing loudly on the flagstones. The sound seemed to animate the creature. It took another step towards him, silent as falling snow. Its borrowed face remained impassive, but Kaelen felt an intense wave of focused malice radiating from it, colder and sharper than the mountain wind. This wasn't just an empty vessel, it was a predator wearing familiar skin. Run! The thought was pure instinct. Kaelen turned and fled not towards the main building but deeper into the cloister's shadowed archways, hopping to loop around to find another entrance. He risked a glance back. The false Torvin wasn't pursuing quickly. It moved with a deliberate, almost casual gait, its empty eyes fixed on him, the faint smile unwavering. It wasn't chasing him, it was hurting him. His heart hammered against his ribs. The whispers, momentarily silenced by the shock, returned with venomous intensity. Nowhere to run, fledgling. It wears the face of your protector. Who can you trust now? Who will believe you? They'll say you've succumbed to the pressure, that your mind has cracked. He pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the need to escape, to warn the others. He ducked into the narrow passage leading towards the kitchens and the lower storage cellars, the air thick with the smell of cold earth and dried herbs. He glanced back again. The passage entrance was empty. Had he lost it, or was it playing with him? He slowed his pace, listening intently. Only the sound of his own ragged breathing and the distant moan of the wind disturbed the heavy silence. He crept forward, reaching the small, cold pantry where Brother Nile kept the meager root vegetables and sacks of grain. He needed a moment to think, to calm the frantic beating of his heart. He leaned against a rough wooden shelf, trying to control his breathing. The false Torvin. It was real. Malika's paranoid theories, the bleeding stone, Ronan's struggles, they weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of the shade's deepening infiltration, culminating in this horrifying mimicry. How many others might there be? Was the Torvin he'd seen in the antechamber earlier the real one, or had the switch already happened? Was Abbot Lorcan truly Lorcan? Was Malika's breakdown genuine or influenced? The paranoia the shade fostered wasn't just a mental state, it was a tactical advantage. It isolated them, turned brother against brother, made them doubt their own senses. Kaelen squeezed his eyes shut. Who could he trust? Perhaps only himself. And even that felt uncertain now, the whispers blurring the line between his own fears and the entity's insidious suggestions. A faint scratching sound came from the corner of the pantry, near the sacks of barley. Rats, Kaelen thought with a shudder. Brother Nile was always complaining about them, but the scratching intensified, rhythmic, deliberate, not the sound of rodents. He peered into the gloom, his eyes straining. A pale shape shifted near the floor. It was Brother Kaelen, the quiet keeper of the ritual flames, crouched low, his back to Kaelen. He seemed to be scraping at the stone floor with a small, sharp object. "Brother Kaelen," Kaelen whispered, relief warring with caution. Kaelen was quiet, devout, seemingly untouched by the growing unease. Perhaps he could help. Kaelen didn't turn, but the scratching stopped. His shoulders hunched. "They see," he murmured, his voice unnervingly hollow, echoing strangely in the small space. "They see the lines, the weakness." "Brother, what are you doing?" Kaelen took a step closer. "I saw something, Brother Torvin, but it wasn't him." Kaelen finally turned his head slowly. His face was pale in the dim light filtering from the corridor, his eyes wide and staring. But unlike the false Torvin's emptiness, Kaelen's eyes held a frantic, terrified light. He held up the object he'd been using, a shard of sharpened flint. Dark lines, like frantic, meaningless symbols, were etched into the flagstones around him. "Making new wards," Kaelen whispered urgently. "The old ones, they sing the wrong song now. The flames show me. The flames whisper truths the abbot ignores." His gaze darted nervously towards the pantry door. "He walks among us. The one with the empty face, he watches." So Kaelen had seen it too. Kaelen felt a surge of desperate hope. "We have to warn the abbot." Kaelen shook his head violently, his eyes rolling. "No, trust no one, the abbot." His faith flickers. The shade clings to him like a shroud, and Dermot feeds it with his rage. Malachi drowns in forbidden knowledge. Ronan's song is broken. He clutched the flint shard tighter, his knuckles white. Only the fire is pure. Only the new lines can hold. His paranoia was even deeper than Kaelen's, bordering on psychosis. Had the strain broken him, or was he, too, a victim of the shade's targeted whispers, isolating him with fear? Suddenly, Kaelen's head snapped up, his gaze fixed on the doorway behind Kaelen. A look of pure terror contorted his features. "He's here," he breathed. Kaelen spun around. Standing silhouetted in the pantry doorway was the false Torvin. It hadn't been fooled. It had known where he was. Its empty eyes seemed to fix on Kaelen, ignoring Kaelen completely for the moment. The faint, chilling smile remained. Kaelen scrambled backwards, pressing himself against the damp stone wall, holding the flint shard out like a feeble weapon. "Begone, abomination," he hissed, his voice thin and reedy. "In the name of the silent saint, I abjure thee." The false Torvin took a slow, deliberate step into the pantry. It raised a hand, Torvin's hand, strong and calloused, and made a complex gesture in the air. Kaelen felt a wave of psychic force, cold and sharp, lance through the small space. Kaelen screamed, a high-pitched, tearing sound that was abruptly cut off. He slumped against the wall, his eyes wide and staring, the frantic terror replaced by the same horrifying vacancy Kaelen had seen in the false Torvin. The flint shard dropped from his lifeless fingers, clattering on the stone floor. His face settled into a faint, identical smile. Kaelen stared in horror. It hadn't killed Cassian. It had. Converted him, replaced him. Now there were two. The false Torvin turned its empty gaze towards Kaelen. Then the false Cassian, still slumped against the wall, also turned its head with that same unnervingly smooth motion, its new, vacant eyes fixing on him. Two sets of empty eyes, two identical, chilling smiles. Kaelen didn't think. He bolted. He scrambled past the false Torvin, shoving blindly, expecting resistance, but the creature allowed him to pass, its cold, smooth skin brushing against his arm like polished marble. He burst back into the corridor and ran, his lungs screaming, terror lending wings to his feet. He didn't know where he was going, just away. Away from the pantry, away from the empty faces, away from the whispers that now shrieked in his mind. Two of them. How many more? Who is real? Who is hiding the void behind their eyes? He found himself back in the main cloister. It was deserted. The moon cast long, skeletal shadows. He looked wildly around, searching for refuge, for a friendly face, but every shadow seemed to hide a watcher, every familiar archway seemed menacing. He stumbled towards the chapel, its heavy wooden doors slightly ajar. Sanctuary, or another trap? He pushed the doors open and slipped inside, collapsing onto the nearest pew, his body trembling uncontrollably. The chapel was empty, lit only by the eternally burning sanctuary lamp near the altar, its small flame casting a pool of warm, red light in the vast, cold darkness. The familiar scent of old incense and cold stone was usually comforting, but now it felt suffocating. He buried his face in his hands, trying to stifle the sobs that threatened to overwhelm him. Torvin, Cassian, replaced, hollowed out, turned into puppets for the shade. Doubt wasn't just infecting their minds, it was consuming them, body and soul. Paranoia wasn't just a symptom, it was a survival necessity. He looked up at the altar, at the large, ancient crucifix hanging above it. The carved face of Christ seemed remote, impassive. Can you not see? Kaelen wanted to scream. We are dying here. Your fortress is falling. The whispers answered, soft and sibilant in the echoing silence of the chapel. He sees. He has always seen. He watches his faithful shepherd lead his flock to the slaughter, or perhaps he is not your shepherd at all. Kaelen stared at the crucifix, and for a terrifying moment the carved eyes seemed to glitter with a cold, alien amusement, the serene expression twisting into a faint, familiar smile. He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head, banishing the hallucination. It was the shade. It was twisting everything, poisoning every symbol of faith, every source of hope. He was trapped in a dying monastery, surrounded by familiar faces hiding monstrous emptiness, hunted by an entity that fed on his deepest fears. He couldn't trust anyone. He couldn't even trust his own senses. The infection was absolute. Chapter 5. The Abbot's Confession. Panic gave way to a chilling, numbing exhaustion. Kaelen remained huddled in the chapel pew for what felt like hours, listening to the frantic rhythm of his own heart gradually slow, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind only a bone-deep weariness and the icy grip of fear. The false Torvin and the false Cassian hadn't followed him here. Were they searching elsewhere, or were they simply waiting, letting the paranoia do their work for them? He couldn't stay here. The chapel, once a place of solace, now felt like a beautifully decorated tomb. He needed to find Abbot Lorcan. Despite Cassion's terrified warnings, despite the insidious whispers planting seeds of doubt about the abbot himself, Lorcan was still the leader, the repository of the monastery's history, and perhaps its last hope. He had to know what Kaelen had seen. He had to know the infection had taken physical form. Steeling himself, Kaelen slipped out of the chapel, moving through the shadowed corridors like a ghost. Every flickering lamp, every creak of ancient wood, every gust of wind sighing through the high windows sent jolts of adrenaline through him. He saw no one, monk or mirror, but the feeling of being watched was omnipresent, a heavy pressure on his skin. He reached the short flight of stairs leading to the abbot's private quarters, a small suite of rooms adjacent to the main library. He hesitated at the heavy oak door, his knuckles hovering inches from the wood. What if Lorcan, too, had been replaced? What if he knocked, only to be greeted by those same empty eyes, that same chilling smile? He trembles, the whispers reminded him. His faith is cracked, an easy vessel. Kaelen pushed the thought away with grim determination. He had to know. He knocked softly, the sound echoing unnervingly in the corridor. A silence. He knocked again, harder this time. Abbot Lorcan, it is Brother Kaelen, I must speak with you. It is urgent. After a long moment, he heard a faint shuffling sound from within, followed by the scraping of a bolt being drawn. The door opened a crack, revealing Abbot Lorcan's face, illuminated by the lamp he held aloft. His eyes, though bloodshot and deeply shadowed, were his own, filled not with emptiness, but with a profound, almost unbearable weariness and a flicker of apprehension. Kaelen, the abbot's voice was raspy, strained. What is it? What disturbs the night? Abbot, may I come in? Kaelen glanced nervously down the dark corridor. I fear we are not safe. Lorcan studied his face for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. He opened the door wider, gesturing Kaelen inside before quickly closing and bolting it behind him. The abbot's main chamber was simple, almost austere, a narrow bed, a prayer stool, a writing desk cluttered with scrolls and texts, and shelves filled with ancient, leather-bound volumes. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and beeswax. Tell me, Lorcan said, setting the lamp on the desk and sinking heavily onto the stool. He looked smaller, frailer than Kaelen had ever seen him. Tell me what you have seen. Kaelen recounted everything, his voice trembling at first, then growing steadier as the words poured out. The encounter with the false Torvin in the cloister, finding the terrified Cassion scratching wards in the pantry, the horrifying moment of Cassion's transformation, the pursuit, the hallucination by the crucifix. He spared no detail, needing the abbot to understand the true horror they faced. Lorcan listened patiently, his face impassive, though his knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the desk. When Kaelen finished, the abbot remained silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the flickering lamp flame. The only sound was the incessant moan of the wind outside the thick stone walls. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. The mirror monks, it has happened before. Kaelen stared at him, Before. Lorcan nodded slowly, his eyes distant, lost in memory. Generations ago, during the time of Abbot Cormac the Blind, the records are fragmented, suppressed, deemed too dangerous for general knowledge, but the barrier weakened then too, not through doubt as it is now, but through ambition. Cormac sought not just to contain the entities, but to harness their power. He believed he could control them, use their cosmic energies for illumination. He gave a short, bitter laugh. Instead, he opened the door. Not wide, but enough for the shade or something very like it to slip through. It manifested as duplicates then, too. Perfect copies, sowing mistrust, turning brother against brother, until the monastery nearly consumed itself. How did they stop it? Kaelen asked urgently. Lorcan's gaze met his, filled with a bleakness that chilled Kaelen to the core. They didn't, not entirely. Abbot Cormac, realizing his folly, performed the rite of sundering, a forbidden ritual. It required a terrible sacrifice. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to his trembling hands. He psychically severed the connection between the duplicates and their hosts, but the cost was immense. It shattered the minds of both the afflicted and the original monks they copied, leaving them husks. And the psychic backlash nearly destroyed the primary barrier. They averted total disaster, but the monastery was decimated. Only a handful survived to rebuild, burying the truth, vowing never to repeat Cormac's hubris. Kaelen felt sick. Shattered minds, husks. Was that the fate awaiting Torvin and Cashin, even if they could somehow be freed? And the shade? Driven back, Lorcan said wearily. But not destroyed, wounded perhaps, waiting for another opportunity, another weakening, another harvest of doubt. He looked up, his eyes filled with self-recrimination. And we have provided it, my faith. Kaelen, the whispers are not wrong. My own certainty wavers. The strain of decades, the weight of responsibility. I feel the barrier thinning not just without, but within me. I fear my weakness is the crack through which this contagion spreads. It was a devastating confession. The spiritual anchor of their community admitting his own faltering faith, confirming Kaelen's deepest, whispered fears. Hope, already fragile, seemed to wither within him. "What can we do?" Kaelen asked, his voice hoarse. "The rite of sundering, is it possible?" Lorcan shook his head firmly. "Never, the risk is too great, it could unleash everything. And I do not have Cormac's strength nor his ruthlessness. No, that path is closed to us." He rose slowly, walking towards a heavily bound book resting on a lectern in the corner, its cover inlaid with faded, complex symbols. There may be another way, mentioned only in fragments in the oldest texts, a counter-resonance, a true harmonious chant, amplified not just by faith but by sacrifice of a different kind, not life perhaps, but memory, will. He opened the ancient book, its pages brittle and yellowed. Kaelen moved closer, peering at the dense script and intricate diagrams depicting energy flows and psychic harmonics. It was far more complex than any ritual Kaelen knew. "It requires absolute unity," Lorcan murmured, tracing a diagram with a trembling finger. "A perfect focus, unsullied by doubt. And a willing anchor, someone to channel the resonance, to absorb the psychic dissonance the shade creates, essentially cleansing the psychic field within the monastery, starving the duplicates, forcing the shade back." "Can we achieve such unity now?" Kaelen asked doubtfully. "With the mirror monks among us, With Brother Malachi lost in heresy, Dermot consumed by rage, Ronan broken. Perhaps not all of us, Lorcan said softly, but enough, a core group, if we can identify those still untouched, still pure in faith. He looked at Kaelen, his gaze searching. You, Kaelen, your faith, though new, burns brightly. You resisted the shade's direct intrusion. You saw the mirror monks for what they were. Kaelen felt a flush of warmth, quickly extinguished by the immense weight of the abbot's implication. And the anchor, he asked, dread coiling in his gut. Who would channel the dissonance? Abbot Lorcan closed the book gently. He turned to face Kaelen fully, his expression one of grim resolve, the earlier weariness replaced by a spark of the leader Kaelen remembered. The shepherd must protect his flock, even if it means guiding them through the darkest valley. The anchor must be the one whose faith, however weakened, is still the cornerstone of this place, the one who bears the ultimate responsibility. He placed a hand briefly on his own chest. It must be me. Kaelen stared at him, understanding the implication. To absorb the psychic dissonance, the concentrated doubt and fear fueling the shade. It would destroy the abbot's mind, surely. It was another form of sacrifice, slower perhaps than Cormac's rite, but just as final. Abbot, no, Kaelen protested. There must be another way. There is no other way, Lorcan interrupted, his voice firm. Time grows short. The shade gains strength with every soul it twists, every seed of doubt it plants. The mirror monks will seek to stop us, to prevent any unifying ritual. We must gather those we can trust, find a secure place, and begin the preparations immediately. He looked Kaelen directly in the eye, the weight of command returning to his gaze. Brother Kaelen, your role is crucial. You must help me identify the faithful. You must be my eyes and ears. You must help me hold the line until the chant can begin. Can you do this? The responsibility was immense, terrifying. To navigate the paranoia, to discern friend from foe, to place his trust in monks who might, at any moment, reveal empty eyes and a chilling smile. The whispers screamed warnings in his mind, urging him to flee, to save himself. But looking into Abbot Lorcan's weary but resolute eyes, seeing the faint spark of hope mingled with the acceptance of his own sacrifice, Kaelen found a strength he didn't know he possessed. His own faith, battered and besieged, flickered, then burned brighter. They were monks of the silent saint, guardians against the void. Their purpose was clear, even if the path was treacherous. Yes, Abbot, Kaelen said, his voice low but steady. I will help you. I will hold the line. Lorcan nodded, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. Then let us begin. May the saint grant us strength, for the night is deep and the shadows lengthen. He turned back to the ancient tome, his frail form silhouetted against the lamplight, a lonely bastion against the encroaching dark. Kaelen watched him, his heart heavy with foreboding, yet alight with a desperate, fragile hope. The confession was made, a potential path revealed. But the monastery was now a hunting ground, and the mirror monks were surely gathering. Their race against time and against the dissolution of their own minds had begun. Chapter 6: The Shattered Mirror. The hours following the abbot's confession were fraught with a suffocating tension. Kaelen moved through the monastery with heightened senses, every shadow seeming deeper, every familiar face a potential mask for the void beneath. He and Lorcan had agreed to act subtly, testing the remaining monks, searching for the telltale signs of the shade's influence. The vacant stare, the unnatural stillness, the faint, chilling smile, or, conversely, the spark of genuine faith, however frightened, that still burned within. Their initial assessment was grim. Brother Malachi remained secluded in the scriptorium, reportedly muttering about cosmic prisons and inherent flaws in creation. Kaelen suspected the shade was feeding his intellectual despair. Brother Dermot stormed through the halls, his face thunderous, accusing anyone who seemed hesitant or fearful of harboring doubt, his misplaced zeal actively contributing to the paranoia the shade thrived on. Brother Ronan was confined to his cell, ostensibly for penance, but Kaelen feared for his fragile mental state. Finian, the gentle herbalist, seemed increasingly scattered, mistaking herbs, weeping silently in corners. Hope rested on the few remaining monks who seemed outwardly untouched, the stoic Brother Nile from the kitchens, the elderly, almost silent Brother Combe, and perhaps a handful of others who kept to themselves. Lorcan had decided the Chamber of Anchors itself, the heart of the psychic barrier, was the only place secure enough, psychically shielded enough, to attempt the harmonious chant. The challenge was reaching it undetected, gathering the necessary ritual components, specific resonant crystals, blessed oils, the ancient chant manuscript, and ensuring only the trustworthy entered. Their first attempt to secure a key resonant crystal from the reliquary ended in disaster. As Kaelen and Lorcan approached the small, heavily warded chamber off the main chapel, they found Brother Nile standing guard outside. He seemed normal, his face etched with worry but his eyes clear. "The abbot sent me," Nile explained nervously. He sensed a disturbance near the relics. Lorcan frowned. "I gave no such order, brother." Niall's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Then, with horrifying speed, the confusion vanished, replaced by the familiar, chilling emptiness. The faint smile bloomed on his lips. Another one, the false Niall. Before Kaelen or Lorcan could react, the false Niall lunged, not at them, but at the reliquary door, slamming it shut and throwing the heavy, blessed bolts. A triumphant, alien malice flashed briefly in its borrowed eyes before they returned to vacancy. They were locked out. "It knows," Lorcan breathed, stepping back, his face pale. "The shade anticipates us. It's moving faster than I feared." They retreated, shaken. The shade wasn't just replacing monks. It was actively working against them, using its knowledge gleaned from its hosts to thwart their plans. How had it known they needed the crystal? Had it overheard Lorcan? Or had it plucked the intention directly from their minds? Their next move was to gather the faithful. Lorcan sent Kaelen with coded messages, simple requests for assistance with tasks that would lead potential allies towards the heavily fortified West Wing Library. A secondary bastion they hoped was still secure. Kaelen approached Brother Combe first, finding the elderly monk tracing patterns in the frost on a high window pane. Combe looked at Kaelen, his ancient eyes surprisingly lucid. He nodded slowly upon receiving the message, murmuring, "The center holds." For now, he agreed to meet them. Finding others proved harder. Fear and suspicion were rampant. One monk Kaelen approached recoiled, accusing him of being one of them, his eyes wild with terror. Another simply refused to leave his cell, barricading the door. It seemed Dermot's accusations and the Shade's whispers had done their work. The community was fractured beyond easy repair. As Kaelen made his way towards the library, Hopping Comb had arrived safely. He heard shouting from the direction of the main choir practice hall. He hesitated, then cautiously approached. Peeking through a crack in the heavy door, he saw a horrifying scene. Brother Dermot stood in the center of the room, his face contorted with rage, wielding a heavy silver censer like a weapon. Facing him were two figures, the false Torvin and the false Kaelen. Dermot, in his blind zeal, had seemingly cornered two of the creatures, mistaking their unnatural stillness for guilty fear. "Abominations," Dermot roared, swinging the censer. "Your hollow faith betrays you. I will purify this house." The false Torvin deflected the blow with effortless grace, its movements fluid and precise. The false Kaelen circled around Dermot, its empty eyes fixed on him, the faint smile unwavering. Kaelen realized with horror that Dermot wasn't cornering them, they were cornering him. "You cannot hide the void within," Dermot bellowed, lunging again. The false Torvin caught Dermot's arm, its grip inhumanly strong. Dermot cried out, struggling, but he was held fast. The false Kaelen stepped closer, raising a hand, mirroring the gesture Kaelen had seen it use in the pantry. Kaelen wanted to scream, to intervene, but he was frozen, helpless. He watched as the psychic energy flowed, as Dermot's struggles ceased, his face going slack. The rage vanished, the zeal extinguished, replaced by the horrifying emptiness. The false Dermot joined the ranks, 3 of them now. Kaelen backed away, heart pounding. They were converting monks actively now, bolstering their numbers. He had to get to the library, to Lorcan and Combe. He found the library doors secured from within. He gave the coded knock. After a tense moment, the door opened, revealing Abbot Lorcan's anxious face. Inside, Brother Combe sat calmly by the large, frost-covered window, seemingly meditating. "Just Combe?" Kaelen asked, his voice tight with fear as Lorcan quickly bolted the door behind him. Lorcan nodded grimly. "The others, either they refused or they did not arrive, and I just saw Finian, his eyes." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The gentle herbalist was lost too. Their numbers were dwindling rapidly. "Dermot is gone," Kaelen reported numbly. "Torvin, Kaelen, Niall, Finian, Dermot. At least 5. How many more we don't know about." Lorcan leaned heavily against the door, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. 5 known duplicates, us 3. Maliki, Ronan. Their status uncertain. Perhaps a dozen others unaccounted for or locked away in fear. He looked at the ancient chant manuscript spread open on the large oak table. The ritual requires a minimum of 3 voices in perfect harmony with the anchor. We have just enough, if we are pure. A sudden heavy pounding rattled the library door. Kaelen and Lorcan froze. Brother Combe opened his eyes, his ancient gaze calm but alert. "Abbot Lorcan." It was the voice of the false Torvin, amplified, resonant, chillingly familiar yet utterly alien. "Open the door. Your resistance is futile. The flaws in your faith are cracks in the dam. The flood is coming." "We know your ritual," echoed the false Kalen's voice, thin and mocking. "We know your hope. It is built on lies, let us in. Embrace the silence, embrace the void. Join us, added the false Niall's voice, deceptively reasonable. Your struggle only prolongs the inevitable. Find peace in dissolution. Then a fourth voice, thick with Dermot's former zealous tone but now hollowed out, boomed. The impure must be purged. Open the door and accept your failing. The pounding intensified, the heavy oak door groaning under the assault. Splinters flew from the edges. They will break through, Kaelen whispered, terror gripping him. We must begin the chant now, Lorcan said, his voice tight but determined. He moved towards the table, gesturing for Kaelen and Combe to join him. Focus. Clear your minds. Let faith be your shield and the harmony our weapon. Kaelen took his place, his hands trembling as he looked at the complex script. Brother Combe stood opposite him, his calm a small island in the sea of fear. Abbot Lorcan stood between them, taking the central position as the anchor, his eyes closed in concentration. Initium harmoniae, Lorcan began, his voice surprisingly strong, resonant. Kaelen took a deep breath, forcing down the panic, focusing on the notes, the ancient words, the flow of psychic energy Lorcan directed. Combe joined in, his voice thin but clear, adding a surprising depth to the harmony. The air in the library began to thrum, a counter-frequency to the psychic static that permeated the monastery. Outside, the pounding stopped. A heavy silence fell. Then a new sound, a grinding, scraping noise. Kaelen risked a glance towards the door. A dark, viscous substance, the same blood-like fluid he'd seen weeping from the stone, was oozing under the door, pooling on the floor. But worse, the wood of the door itself seemed to be softening, warping, as if the shade's influence was dissolving the physical barrier. The harmonious chant intensified, Lorcan pushing more energy into it, his face beaded with sweat, his body trembling visibly under the strain. Kaelen felt the psychic resonance building, a warm, pure light pushing back against the cloying darkness. For a moment, hope surged. Suddenly, Brother Combe gasped, his voice faltering in the chant. His eyes widened in confusion, then horror. He clutched his head, stumbling back from the table. "Brother Combe," Lorcan cried, his concentration breaking for a fatal instant. "It lies," Combe shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the manuscript. "The harmony, it doesn't seal, it attracts. Abbot Cormac didn't banish the shade, he fed it, the sacrifice. It was fuel." The whispers flooded Kaelen's mind, seizing on Combe's outburst. "Yes, the truth. Lorcan leads you to your doom. He offers himself as the final meal." Lorcan stared at Combe aghast. "No, the text." "The text is a lie, a trap," Combe clawed at his temples. "I see it now. The true patterns. Cormac was a fool, or worse." His eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed to the floor, convulsing. The harmony shattered completely. The warm light dissolved, replaced by an overwhelming wave of cold, psychic pressure. Abbot Lorcan cried out, clutching his chest, staggering back against the table. The manuscript fluttered to the floor. The library door burst inwards, not broken, but seemingly melted away, revealing the four mirror monks standing silhouetted against the dim corridor light. False Torvin, false Cassian, false Niall, false Dermot. their empty eyes fixed on the scene, their identical smiles widening. Behind them, more figures lurked in the shadows. Kaelen caught a glimpse of Finian's gentle face, now terrifyingly vacant. Their numbers had grown. "The final notes," the false Torvin said, its voice echoing in the sudden, crushing silence. "Played beautifully. Thank you, Abbot, for gathering the offering." Lorcan stared at them, his face a mask of despair and dawning horror. Had Combe been right? Had the chant been a lure? Had his desperate hope been manipulated by the very entity he sought to fight? The doubt, held at bay by sheer will, flooded him completely. Kaelen watched, frozen in terror, as Abbot Lorcan's form seemed to flicker, his eyes clouding over. The strain, the broken hope, Combs' terrifying revelation, it was too much. The anchor point wasn't just absorbing dissonance, it was shattering. The mirror monks advanced slowly into the library, spreading out, their empty eyes fixed on the faltering abbot and the terrified Kaelen. The shattered mirror reflected only the void. Hope was extinguished. The chant had failed. The trap was sprung. Chapter 7: Silence Broken. The failure of the chant echoed in the library like a physical blow. The carefully constructed counter-resonance collapsed, leaving a psychic vacuum swiftly filled by the triumphant pressure of the murmuring shade. Abbot Lorcan swayed, his face slackening, the light of consciousness dimming in his eyes as the devastating doubt consumed him. Brother Combe lay still on the floor, his body shuddering faintly, his mind lost somewhere between terrifying revelation and utter collapse. Kaelen was alone, surrounded. The 5 mirror monks, Torvin, Cashin, Niall, Dermot, Finian, advanced slowly, their movements unnervingly synchronized, their vacant eyes fixed on him and the faltering abbot. Their identical smiles held no warmth, only the chill of the void they represented. Kaelen backed away, stumbling against a bookshelf, ancient texts tumbling to the floor. There was nowhere left to run. "It is time, fledgling," the false Torvin intoned, its voice resonating with cold power. "Your struggle is over. Join the quiet harmony. Shed the burden of belief." "Find peace," whispered the false Finian, its gentle face now a terrifying mask. The whispers surged in Kaelen's mind, no longer subtle but a roaring torrent of despair and negation. "Give in, it's easier. No more fear, no more doubt, only silence, only peace." He looked at Abbot Lorcan, whose form seemed almost translucent now, his spirit flickering like a dying flame. He thought of the generations of monks who had sacrificed everything, maintaining the vigil, holding back the tide. He thought of his own naive faith, arriving just months ago, full of certainty. Had it all been for nothing? A futile gesture against an indifferent, consuming void. Despair washed over him, cold and absolute. The whispers intensified, promising release and end to the struggle. It would be so easy to let go, to allow the emptiness to flood in, to become one of them, free from the agony of hope and fear. His resistance crumbled. He closed his eyes, waiting for the cold touch, the conversion, the peace of dissolution. Suddenly, a different sound cut through the psychic onslaught, a guttural roar of defiance, thick with cynical fury. "Get away from him, you empty-faced freaks." The library's side door, a smaller entrance usually used for accessing the archives, burst open. Brother Malachi stood framed in the doorway, his face wild, his spectacles askew, clutching a heavy, iron-bound ledger like a club. He looked half-mad, his robes torn, but his eyes burned with a fierce, desperate anger that was entirely his own. "You think your hollow whispers are the only truth," Malachi yelled, advancing into the room, placing himself between Kaelen and the advancing mirror monks. "You feed on doubt, but you forget its counterpart, skepticism, the refusal to accept any convenient lie, including yours." The mirror monks paused, their empty eyes fixing on Malachi, their smiles faltering slightly, as if momentarily confused by this unexpected, dissonant note. "I've read the real texts," Malachi spat, brandishing the heavy ledger. "The ones Cormac didn't burn. He wasn't just a fool, he tried to bargain, offered faith as fuel. But there's a flaw in your design, Shade. You mimic, you corrupt, but you cannot create. You are hollow. You are nothing." He swung the heavy ledger, catching the false Finian squarely on the head. The creature staggered back, not with pain but with surprise, its borrowed face flickering, momentarily losing cohesion. "Malachi," Kaelen gasped, stunned by the monk's sudden appearance and furious defense. "No time, fledgling," Malachi yelled, dodging a lunge from the false Dermot. "Lorcan's fatting, the barrier's tied to him. If he falls completely, the real prisoners get out. Forget the chant. We need to sever the connection, now." Sever the connection. Kaelen remembered Lorcan's warning, the right of sundering shattered minds. But Lorcan said. "Lorcan feared the cost," Malachi grunted, shoving the false Nile back. "But annihilation is a higher cost. Cormac's notes. He found another way, not a total severance, but a psychic cauterization. Burns the link, frees the host. Hurts like hell, might scramble their wits, but better than this." He gestured wildly at the advancing mirror monks. "Requires immense psychic energy focused precisely, like a lance." The false Torvin advanced on Malachi, its movements faster now, more purposeful. "The scribe embraces chaos. Fitting." Malachi laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "I embrace reality, you empty suit, and reality bites." He dodged again, shoving Kaelen hard towards the abbot. "Kaelen, you're the fledgling, your faith is still. Malleable, less rigid than ours. You can channel it, focus. All the fear, all the doubt, all the anger. Turn it into a weapon. Aim for the link, the nexus, point behind their eyes." Kaelen stared at the faltering abbot, then at the advancing horrors, then at Malachi, who was now desperately fending off two mirror monks with the heavy book. Sever the link. Use his own fear and doubt as fuel. It felt like heresy, twisting the core tenets of their faith. "Do it," Malachi's desperate thought, raw and unshielded, slammed into Kaelen's mind. "Or we are all lost." Outside, a deep, resonant groan echoed through the monastery, not of stone, but of psychic tension stretched to its breaking point. The primary barrier, linked to Lorcan's fatting consciousness, was failing catastrophically. Flashes of impossible color pulsed beyond the library windows, and the air grew thick with the scent of ozone and something alien and indescribably ancient. The true prisoners were stirring. Decision made. Kaelen turned towards the nearest mirror monk, the false Cassian, its empty eyes fixed on the struggling Malachi. He closed his eyes, not in prayer but in concentration. He didn't try to summon faith or light. Instead, he embraced the darkness within him, the terror, the confusion, the crushing doubt, the helpless anger. He gathered it all, compressing it, hunting it into a single point of incandescent psychic energy, fueled by the raw, primal instinct to survive. He opened his eyes, focusing on the space just behind the false Cassian's vacant stare, searching for the psychic tether Maliki described. He found it, a faint, shimmering cord of dark energy connecting the puppet to its unseen master. Now, he unleashed the focused blast of raw psychic force, pouring all his fear and anger into it like poison into a vein. The false Cassian jerked violently, its head snapping back. A high-pitched screech, utterly inhuman, tore from its throat. The emptiness in its eyes flickered, replaced for a horrifying instant by Cassian's own terror and confusion, before the eyes rolled back and the figure collapsed, unconscious but no longer vacant. The faint smile was gone. It worked. Kaelen felt a dizzying wave of nausea, the psychic feedback staggering him. But Maliki gave a triumphant yell, momentarily driving back the false Torvin. Yes, again, Kaelen, hit them while they're reeling. Renewed by the small victory, Kaelen turned towards the false Nile, gathering his chaotic emotions, focusing, unleashing another psychic lance. The false Nile cried out, stumbling back, its form flickering before collapsing beside the unconscious Cassian. 2 down. 3 mirror monks remained, Torvin, Dermot, Finian, plus the unknown number lurking outside. And they were learning. The false Torvin abandoned Maliki, moving towards Kaelen with terrifying speed, its hand outstretched, psychic energy crackling around its fingertips. Maliki intercepted him, tackling the false Torvin around the legs, bringing them both crashing to the floor amidst scattered books. Burn the others, Kaelen. Burn the links. Kaelen targeted the false Finian, pouring his psychic rage into the attack. Finian shrieked and collapsed. Only Dermot and Torvin remained. The false Dermot lunged, not at Kaelen, but at the still faltering Abbot Lorcan, reaching for his head. No, Kaelen screamed, spinning, desperately trying to gather his energy for another blast. He wouldn't be fast enough. Suddenly, Abbot Lorcan's eyes snapped open. They were filled not with emptiness, nor with despair, but with a burning, focused light. He met the false Dermot's attack with an upraised hand, and a wave of pure, white energy erupted from him, slamming into the duplicate. The false Dermot was thrown back as if struck by lightning, landing in a heap, the link instantly severed, the original Dermot groaning amidst the wreckage. Lorcan staggered, the effort clearly costing him, but he remained standing, his eyes fixed on the false Torvin who was disentangling itself from Maliki. The shade, Lorcan breathed, his voice weak but clear. It overreached, tried to absorb me too quickly. It exposed itself. The false Torvin rose, its borrowed face contorted in an expression of cold fury, the empty smile replaced by a snarl that didn't belong on Torvin's features. You cannot resist the tide. We are not the tide, Lorcan said, gathering his remaining strength. Kaelen felt a surge of pure faith radiating from him, a beacon in the chaos. We are the stone, and the stone endures. Kaelen, sensing the shift, added his own psychic energy, not the chaotic blast he'd used before, but a focused beam of resurgent faith. joining Lorcan's. Malachi, scrambling to his feet, added his own cynical but fierce determination to the mix. Their combined energy formed a lance of pure light aimed directly at the false Torvin. The creature recoiled, raising its hands, a shield of black energy forming before it. The light struck the shield, and the library filled with a deafening roar, the psychic energies battling with terrifying force. Cracks appeared in the stone walls. The very air vibrated. Then, with a final, ear-splitting shriek that seemed to echo from the void itself, the false Torvin dissolved, not collapsing like the others, but disintegrating into black dust and fading whispers, the shade's direct anchor point violently severed. Silence descended, broken only by the groans of the awakening monks Cassian, Niall, Finian, Dermot, and the ragged breathing of Kaelen, Lorcan, and Malachi. Abbot Lorcan swayed, caught by Malachi before he could fall. His face was pale as death, but his eyes were clear. "It is done," Lorcan whispered. "The shade is driven back for now." But the victory felt hollow. The deep, groaning sound from the heart of the monastery intensified. Red light pulsed outside the windows. The primary barrier, tied to Lorcan's now depleted life force and shattered by the shade's final assault, was irrevocably breached. The silence was broken. The mirror monks were defeated, but the cost was monumental. And the true horrors, the ancient entities the monastery had contained for centuries, were stirring in the depths. The infection of doubt was purged, only to reveal the festering wound beneath. Chapter 8: Echoes in the Void. The echoes of the shade's final shriek faded, leaving a silence more profound and terrifying than any that had come before. It was the silence of a breached dam, the pause before the flood. The red light pulsing beyond the library windows intensified, casting the room and its exhausted occupants in a hellish glow. The groaning from the mountain's heart deepened into a grinding vibration that shook the very foundations of the ancient monastery. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the air grew thick with an energy that felt ancient, vast, and utterly inimical to human life. The primary barrier was gone. Abbot Lorcan, leaning heavily on Malachi, surveyed the scene, the awakening, disoriented monks, Torvin, Cassian, Niall, Finian, Dermot, Combe stirring amidst the debris, the shattered library door, the pools in crimson light. His face, etched with exhaustion and pain, held no triumph, only grim understanding. "We stopped the infection," he rasped, his voice thin as thread, "but killed the patient." He looked at Kaelen, his eyes filled with a terrible clarity. "The vigil has failed after centuries. It has failed." Kaelen felt a cold dread seize him, colder than any mountain wind, colder than the shade's touch. The mirror monks had been terrifying, insidious, but they were merely symptoms. The true horror, the cosmic entities they had guarded against, were now unrestrained. What happens now?" Kaelen asked, his voice barely audible. "Now," Malachi said, his cynicism replaced by a stark, pragmatic fear, "we face what generations before us only held at bay. The jailers have lost the keys." One of the newly awakened monks, Brother Finian, whimpered, curling into a ball on the floor, his mind clearly shattered by the experience of being a vessel for the shade. Brother Dermot sat up, clutching his head, his face blank with confusion, the zealous fire extinguished, leaving only bewildered emptiness. Torvin pushed himself upright, his usual stoicism replaced by a haunted look, his eyes darting towards the pulsing red light outside as if recognizing an ancient enemy. A low, guttural chanting began to echo from the depths, seemingly vibrating up through the stone floor. It wasn't human chanting. The tones were wrong, the rhythm structured around non-Euclidean principles that made Kaelen's head spin and his stomach churn. Accompanying it was a sound like immense stone blocks sliding against each other, far below. "They rise," Lorcan whispered, his gaze fixed on the floor. "The old ones, the sleepers, awakened by the barrier's collapse." "Can we restore it?" Kaelen asked desperately. "Another ritual, another anchor." Lorcan shook his head slowly. The barrier was woven over centuries, anchored to this place, to the lineage of abbots, to relics now likely powerless. Its collapse was final. What comes now is not containment but consequence. He pushed himself away from Maliki, standing unsteadily but resolute. Our duty changes. It is no longer to contain but to warn, and if possible to delay. "Delay," Maliki scoffed, though fear tightened his voice. "Delay that, with what? Harsh language and poorly thrown books." "There is one last measure," Lorcan said, turning towards a specific section of the library shelf, seemingly untouched by the chaos. "Not containment, but a message, a final echo." He ran his trembling fingers along the spines of ancient scrolls housed in lead cylinders. The beacon of Jude, a psychic scream amplified by the mountain's core designed to pierce the veil to reach receptive minds beyond these peaks. A warning, a final testament. He located a specific cylinder, marked with a symbol Kaelen didn't recognize. "It requires a focused mind, immense psychic energy, and," his voice faltered, "a life force, willingly given, to ignite the beacon." Kaelen understood immediately. Another sacrifice. Lorcan had already spent himself fighting the shade, anchoring the failed chant. He wouldn't survive activating this beacon. Before Kaelen could protest, Maliki stepped forward. "No, Abbot, you've done enough." He took the lead cylinder from Lorcan's grasp, his expression a strange mix of fear, cynicism, and unexpected resolve. "Let the skeptics send the final warning. Perhaps they'll believe me." Lorcan looked at him, surprised, then nodded slowly. "Brother Maliki, your faith was unconventional, but perhaps in the end the strongest." "Faith," Maliki gave a short, harsh laugh. "Call it intellectual integrity, Abbot. Someone needs to tell the universe its foundations are flawed." He looked at Kaelen, his gaze sharp. "Get the others out, Kaelen, those who can still walk. Torvin, Dermot, rouse yourselves. There's a hidden passage behind the main altar in the chapel, leads down the western slope, used by Abbot Cormac's survivors. Go now, tell the world what happened here. Tell them what's coming." The chanting from below grew louder, the vibrations more intense. A section of the library floor buckled upwards, revealing glimpses of cyclopean geometry and sickeningly luminous colors from the depths. "Go," Maliki urged, clutching the lead cylinder. "I need focus." Kaelen hesitated, torn between duty and the instinct to stay, to help. Lorcan placed a frail hand on his shoulder. "He is right, Kaelen. Your duty now lies beyond these walls. You are the witness. You carry the truth of our failure. That is your burden now." Kaelen looked at the awakening monks, some catatonic like Finian, others functional but shell-shocked like Torvin and Dermot. He nodded numbly. He helped Torvin haul the barely responsive Dermot to his feet. Cassian and Niall seemed capable of moving on their own, their faces masks of terror. Combe remained unconscious. Lorcan looked at the old monk, then shook his head sadly. "We cannot carry them all." As Kaelen herded the small group of survivors towards the library exit, ignoring the pulsing light and the growing sense of presence pressing in from outside and below, he glanced back. Abbot Lorcan stood beside Malachi, placing a hand on the skeptic's shoulder, adding his own fatting life force to the final ritual. Malachi held the cylinder aloft, his eyes closed, his face contorted in immense concentration, sweat pouring down his face. A brilliant white light began to emanate from the cylinder, pushing back against the encroaching red gloom. "Tell them," Malachi gasped, his voice strained, barely audible above the growing cacophony from below. "Tell them the silence is broken, and the screams are real." Then the light flared, consuming Malachi and Lorcan in its blinding intensity, a silent explosion of pure psychic energy that lanced upwards through the mountain, aimed at the uncaring stars. Kaelen felt the psychic shockwave hit him even as he stumbled out of the library, pushing the others ahead of him. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling, a message of pure terror, despair, and warning, broadcast across the void. He didn't look back. He led the ragged group of survivors through the monastery, now filled with terrifying sounds and sights, shadows detaching from walls, stones weeping viscous fluids, impossible geometries flickering at the edge of vision. They reached the chapel. Behind the main altar, Torvin, his memory apparently intact despite the ordeal, located the hidden catch Malachi had described. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow, dark passage sloping steeply downwards. Cold, damp air rushed out, carrying the scent of earth and ancient fear. Kaelen pushed the others inside, the dazed Dermot, the trembling Cassian and Niall, the grimly silent Torvin. He was the last to enter, pausing only for a moment at the threshold. He looked back into the violated sanctuary. The red light pulsed violently. The non-Euclidean chanting reached a fever pitch. A colossal shadow, vast and indistinct, began to rise from the chasm where the library floor had been, its form hinted at by the swirling chaos. A thing of too many angles, of impossible depths, of cosmic indifference made manifest. The monastery of St. Jude the Silent was silent no more. It was screaming, and the echoes were just beginning to spread. Kaelen turned and plunged into the darkness of the escape tunnel, pulling the hidden door shut behind him. He didn't know where it led, or what horrors awaited them on the slopes below, or if the world beyond would even heed the final, desperate warning launched by a cynical monk and a dying abbot. He only knew that they had failed, that the prison was broken, and that the echoes of this day would reverberate through eternity. The infection of doubt had been purged, but the true nightmare had just begun. The end.